Every promise we make in front of others is easy. The real vow is the one we whisper to ourselves in silence, the promise to protect the ones we love, even when the truth might tear everything apart. The church smelled like lilies and old wood, that mix of faith and dust that only small town sanctuaries seem to keep alive. Light poured through the stained glass windows, casting fragments of color on the white aisle where my daughter, Emily Carter, stood radiant and trembling. Her veil shimmered like morning dew. The string quartet was halfway through Pachelbel's canon in D. My heart swelled with every note, each one a memory of scraped knees, piano recitals, late-night tears over boys who didn't deserve her. I'd spent 27 years dreaming of this moment, the day my daughter would walk into a life better, safer, freer than mine. And for one fragile minute, it seemed possible. Pastor Coleman smiled gently from the altar. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice like warm smoke, we are gathered here today. That's when my son Jordan stood up. He was only 19, but grief and anger had aged him in ways I still couldn't grasp. His voice cut through the hush like glass breaking. Before you ask that question, he said, eyes burning, I have something to say. A ripple of confusion spread across the pews. Guests turned. Cameras lowered. Emily froze mid-breath. I felt my heart stop as Jordan's hand clenched into a fist. He looked straight at the groom, Nathan Green, the mayor's son, the boy with the polite smile and the polished shoes, and then turned to the crowd. The man my sister's about to marry, Jordan said, his voice shaking, is the reason Mom tried to kill herself. The world didn't just stop, it imploded. At first, no one moved, no one even breathed. Then came the whispers, sharp, slicing sounds that filled the church like the buzzing of hornets. My knees wobbled. Emily's bouquet slipped from her hands, the white roses scattering down the aisle. Jordan, I whispered, but the word barely left my throat. He kept talking. You think this family is perfect? His voice cracked high with fury. You have no idea what the Greens did to us, what he did to her. Nathan? Emily's voice was small, fragile. What's he talking about? Nathan looked lost, pale, trembling, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I don't know, he stammered. Jordan, I swear I don't know what you mean. But Jordan wouldn't stop. He turned toward me, eyes wet but fierce. Tell them, Mom, he demanded. Tell them what they did to you. Every eye in the church turned to me. I could feel the weight of years pressing against my chest, years I'd buried beneath smiles and PTA meetings and polite laughter at holiday dinners. Every lie I'd told to keep my children safe now rose to choke me. My voice trembled. Jordan, please, not now. But he wouldn't listen. If you don't say it, I will. He pulled something from his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper, yellowed with age. I knew instantly what it was. The letter, my suicide note from 2005. It's strange, the way the past doesn't fade, it waits. It waits in drawers, in dusty envelopes, in the quiet corners of a mother's heart, until the day your children stumble upon it and demand answers you've never dared to give. I had written that letter after the world took everything from me, my husband, my dignity, my peace. I never mailed it, never burned it, just folded it away with the rest of my shame. Now, in front of 200 guests, my 19-year-old son unfolded my despair. I can't live with what they did, Jordan Reed, his voice trembling but steady. If you're reading this, I want you to know I tried to protect you, Emily. I tried to keep you from the truth, but some wounds never heal. Gasps rippled through the room. Pastor Coleman took a step forward, unsure whether to intervene. Madison Green, the groom's mother, perfectly composed in her emerald dress, turned ghostly pale. Stop, she hissed. This is madness. But Jordan looked at her like a soldier facing the enemy. You knew, didn't you? Madison's face hardened. Young man, you are ruining your sister's wedding. You ruined our family, Jordan shouted. You and your husband, you paid Mom to keep quiet? The room erupted. Guests stood. Cameras flashed. I felt the world tilt, my breath collapsing in on itself. Emily turned toward me, tears streaking down her face. Mom, she whispered. What is he talking about? I wanted to run. I wanted to vanish back into the years when she still believed her mother was invincible, when the truth wasn't a loaded gun in the hands of her brother. But mothers don't get to run. We stay, we absorb, we bleed quietly. Emily, I said softly, I'll explain everything, just please sit down. But it was too late, the damage had already begun to spread. Outside, thunder rolled, the kind that always comes before an autumn storm. Inside, chaos reigned. The Greens lawyer, who doubled as the mayor's campaign manager, whispered frantically into his phone. Guests murmured, phones raised, capturing every trembling frame of our collapse. And there I was, Jackie Carter, single mother, survivor, pariah, standing in the ruins of my daughter's perfect day. Pastor Coleman tried to regain control. Let us take a moment, he began, but even his voice wavered. Nathan took a hesitant step toward me. Mrs. Carter, I swear I had no idea. Whatever happened? Don't, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Just don't. I looked at Madison Green, her hands trembling around her clutch, her perfect mask cracking at the edges. For a moment, our eyes locked, two women bound by one awful secret. Then she turned away. When the storm finally broke, it was almost merciful. Rain hammered the stained glass, drowning out the shouting. Jordan stood alone in the aisle, breathing hard, letter still clutched in his fist. Emily sat frozen on the altar steps, veil torn, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Nathan reached for her, but she pulled away. And I walked down that aisle, past the lilies, past the whispers, past everything I had once dreamed of for my children. Because there are moments when silence becomes betrayal. And though my son had broken my heart with his outburst, a part of me, the part that had carried the secret for 19 years, was grateful. He had done what I never could. He had told the truth. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days after the wedding. That wasn't. It came in gray sheets that blurred the streets of Maplewood, the kind of rain that made you feel as if the whole town was trying to wash away its sins. I sat at the kitchen table, watching water slide down the window pane, listening to the hum of the refrigerator because it was the only thing steady in a world that had just come apart. The bouquet Emily had dropped lay wilted in the sink, its stems brown and bent. No one had dared throw it away. My phone buzzed again, messages from reporters, from neighbors pretending to check in but really dying to know the story behind the spectacle. "Is it true?" they asked. "Was it the mayor? Was it you?" I didn't answer. Some truth still had teeth. Emily hadn't spoken to me since that day. She had locked herself in her old bedroom upstairs, blinds closed, lights off, her once laughing voice replaced by silence. Jordan had moved through the house like a ghost, pretending to be fine but carrying the look of someone who'd started a fire he couldn't put out. "Mom," he said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched for hours. "Didn't mean to ruin everything." I looked up from my untouched cup of coffee. "You didn't ruin anything," I said softly. "You just ended the pretending." He hesitated, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I found that letter weeks ago. I thought you'd tell her yourself." I wanted to tell him I had tried. That for years I'd opened my mouth to confess and then swallowed the words again because motherhood sometimes means lying to protect your children's hope. But I only said, "You did what you thought was right." He nodded, then slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "There's more," he said. Inside was a printed copy of an old newspaper article, dated August 2005. The headline read, "Local businessman cleared in harassment allegations." Beneath it, a photo of Peter Green, younger, smiling, confident, shaking hands with the police chief. My breath caught. The caption underneath was simple: "Charges dropped. No sufficient evidence." I remembered everything: the cold room, the questions, the way Madison had looked at me like I was dirt under her shoe, the way she'd placed that envelope of money on my table and said, "You can't win, dear, you'll only destroy yourself." I had taken the money, not for me, for Emily, who was only 7 then, and for the baby growing inside me that I'd lose 3 months later. Jordan's voice cut through the fog of memory. "You knew him, didn't you? Peter Green." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "And Nathan?" "Stop." My voice came out sharp, brittle. "Don't finish that sentence." He leaned back, folding his arms, studying me with the same steady gaze his father once had, a quiet demand for honesty. "You said you'd explain everything, so explain." I stared out the window again. Rain blurred the world into streaks of gray and gold. "It was a long time ago," I began. "Before you were born. I was working nights at the town library, trying to keep our lives together after your father died. Peter Green used to come in to read the paper, or at least that's what he said." Jordan stayed silent, waiting. "He offered to help me," I continued. "He said he admired how hard I worked. I was naive. I thought kindness meant safety. But one night, when I locked up late, my throat closed. He followed me to my car." Jordan's face hardened. "You went to the police?" "Yes, and Madison showed up the next morning with her pearls and her perfect smile. She told me I'd misunderstood, that Peter was under stress, that making a scene would ruin his campaign. And she paid you off." I nodded once. The silence that followed was unbearable. Jordan's eyes glistened with anger, but it wasn't directed at me. "He gets to be mayor," he said bitterly. "And you get to carry this alone for 20 years. It's over now." I said, though even I didn't believe it. "No," he said, "it's not. You need to tell Emily everything. She deserves to know who she was about to marry." I flinched. "Not yet. Mom, not yet." The word came out louder than I intended. My hand shook as I gripped the coffee mug. "She's broken enough already." He stood up, pacing. "You think she's not going to find out anyway? The internet's tearing us apart. They're saying you were the mayor's mistress. They're saying I made it up. They're saying Emily planned the whole thing for attention." His voice cracked under the weight of it. I wanted to hold him, but he pulled away. "I'm not sorry for what I did," he said finally. "I'm just sorry you didn't do it first." Then he left, the front door slamming behind him. That night, unable to sleep, I went up to Emily's room. The door was closed, but I could hear the soft hum of her phone, the faint light under the crack of the door. I knocked, no answer. "Can I come in?" After a long pause, her voice came, flat and cold. "It doesn't matter anymore, Mom." I opened the door anyway. She was sitting on the floor in her wedding dress, still unboxed, spread around her like a ghost. Her eyes were red, her hair undone. On her phone screen, a news headline glowed: "Mayor's son's wedding collapses amid family scandal." She looked up at me. "Is it true?" she asked. Everything Jordan said, I couldn't lie to her anymore. "Yes," her breath hitched. "So Nathan and I." "No," I yes, "but his father?" Yes, she closed her eyes, tears spilling over. You let me fall in love with him. I reached for her, but she recoiled. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? She whispered. You built my life on a lie. Her words sliced through me. You were a child, I said. You deserved a chance to grow up without that shadow. But you knew I'd marry him someday? She demanded. You saw us together and said nothing? I hoped it would never come to this, I whispered. Emily stood, trembling. Hope isn't protection, Mom, it's denial. She walked past me down the hall, her bare feet silent on the wood. I can't even look at you right now. The door to her room shut with a soft click that felt louder than thunder. Later, alone in the dark, I sat at the kitchen table again, the old letter still lying there. Rain drummed on the roof. I could almost hear Madison Green's voice echoing from years ago. Women like you should learn when to stay quiet. I picked up the letter, unfolded it one last time, and stared at my own words, a younger version of me, desperate and broken. I can't live with what they did. I took a deep breath, lit a match, and held it to the corner of the page. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges into black lace. For the first time in 20 years, I watched the past burn. But the thing about ashes, they don't disappear. They linger, waiting for the next storm to scatter them back into the world. And as the fire died, I knew this wasn't over, not even close. The night before the wedding, the sky had been mercifully clear. The sunset bled orange across the horizon like a wound slowly closing. The Carter home buzzed with nervous energy, steaming dresses, clinking champagne flutes, curling irons left on too long. I moved through it all like a shadow, smiling where I was supposed to, holding in everything I should have said. The rehearsal dinner was hosted at the Green Estate, a sprawling colonial with wraparound porches, manicured hedges, and the kind of chandeliers that made you speak in a whisper. Emily glowed in her champagne satin dress, Nathan's hand resting lightly at the small of her back, like he couldn't believe she was real. I stood at the edge of the room, hands clasped, watching my daughter laugh with guests who thought this was a storybook romance. I wanted to believe it too. Then she walked in, Madison Green. She hadn't aged the way normal people do. No softening at the edges, no tiredness in the eyes. She was still sharp, every line, every angle, every curl on her head meticulously placed. She wore a wine-colored sheath dress and diamonds that caught the light like warning signs. And just like that, I was 29 again. Broke, alone, terrified, watching that same woman walk into my kitchen with hush money and a smile. Jacqueline, she said smoothly, approaching me like we were old friends sharing a joke. You look lovely. I forced a smile. Madison, can we talk? She asked, already steering me away from the crowd toward the back patio. I didn't resist, there was no escaping this. We stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The patio was strung with fairy lights, glowing softly over white linen tables and half-eaten mini quiches. Madison turned to me, all warmth gone from her face. You should have stayed in the shadows, Jackie. That's where people like you thrive. I laughed, a low, bitter sound. And people like you? What do you call your shadows, Madison? Country clubs? Her eyes narrowed. We both know what happened all those years ago, and we both know you took the money. You think money erases what your husband did? No, she said plainly. But it buys silence, that was the deal. And now you're letting your son dig up the past like it's some kind of buried treasure. You and I both know that nothing good comes from dragging skeletons into the light. I stepped forward. He's not digging, he's remembering. She blinked. Excuse me? I let the words hang there. Jordan had been 3 years old when I miscarried the baby that came after. I thought he hadn't understood what was happening, just a child, too small to remember. But a week ago, I caught him holding an old stuffed toy, one I'd thrown out years ago, and he'd whispered, "Was this for the baby?" Now I understood. He'd always know more than I thought. Madison straightened her shoulders. You're going to keep your son in check or you're going to regret it. There are people watching this wedding. Donors, press, Peter's running for re-election in 6 months. This can't blow up. You're threatening the wrong person, I said, voice tight. I stayed quiet for 20 years. Not for you, not for Peter, for my daughter. But this was your mistake. You let her fall in love with the son of a man who, I stopped myself. You did that, not me. Madison's mouth curled. You think you're some kind of martyr? You could have left town, started over. But no, you stayed. You raised your kids here, right under our nose, so don't pretend you didn't want this. I stayed because running meant letting you win, I snapped. And I wasn't going to let my children grow up believing the world belongs only to people like you. For a moment, the polished mask cracked. Then she smiled again, cold, pitying. You poor thing. Still playing the victim? No, I said, not anymore. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Then let me be clear. If this wedding falls apart tomorrow, I will bury you. Legally, financially, socially. You won't be able to get a job selling Girl Scout cookies in this town. I looked her dead in the eyes. The truth's already moving, Madison, and it doesn't care about your lawyers. She turned on her heel and walked away, heels clicking like gunshots across the stone patio. When I returned inside, the speeches had started. Nathan stood at the center, glass raised. I just want to say how lucky I am, he beamed, to be joining such a wonderful family. Emily, I love you. And to Jackie, thank you for raising the most incredible woman I've ever met. Everyone clapped, everyone smiled, except for Jordan. He stood in the back, watching me, jaw clenched. After dessert, while people danced and posed for photos, I slipped outside again, trying to breathe. Jordan followed. You talked to her, didn't you? He asked. I nodded. What did she say? She threatened us. He kicked a stone across the patio. We should go public, all of it, the article, the money, your letter. No, I said quietly. Not yet. Why not? Because this isn't about revenge, not yet, it's about timing. Jordan looked at me like he didn't recognize the person speaking. You still think Emily's going to marry him? I looked through the window. Emily was dancing, her head on Nathan's shoulder, lost in a world she thought was hers. She loves him, I said. She still believes in the version of life I built for her. A safe one, a good one, tearing that away in public tomorrow, it'll break her. Jordan's voice softened. So what do we do? I looked at my son, no longer a boy, but a young man holding his mother's shattered truths in his hands. We wait for the right moment, I said. And when it comes, we don't whisper. We burn the whole lie down. When the house fell quiet after the rehearsal, the green estate lights dimmed, but nothing about the evening felt settled. I drove home with the radio off, the road white with the reflection of street lamps on wet asphalt. Jordan sat beside me, pale and unmoving, fingers tapping a rhythm he couldn't hear. In the rearview mirror, the bridal veil from the reception fluttered like a ghost tied to the trunk of my car. At home, the kitchen light burned. Emily's bouquet lay on the counter like a small accusation. I made 2 mugs of coffee, one for me, one for Jordan, and we sat at the table like conspirators plotting a crooked map. You talked to Madison, Jordan said again, as if repeating it might change the edges of what had happened. She threatened legal action and basically everything else. She did, I said, and she made it clear she'd bought my silence once. And she whispered that if it came out now, she'd make sure I disappeared from this town's good graces. I gave a humorless laugh. Money is a loud thing, Jordan. It clapped its hands back then and nobody wanted to listen. He unfolded his hands and pushed a small envelope across the table. I found this in the filing cabinet. He was careful not to meet my eyes as he slid it closer. You kept it. Inside, the note was as mundane as a receipt and as heavy as a verdict. A bank deposit slip from 2005, $50,000. Madison Green's signature loomed at the bottom of the page like a stain on paper. Underneath, in my handwriting I barely recognized, were 2 words, for Emily. I traced the curl of the ink with a fingertip, a map of choices that had left me stranded. The money, the offer, the bargain that was supposed to keep the world from breaking apart. I had taken it because I wanted to buy one thing for my daughter, peace. I wanted Emily to grow up without the ugly knowledge that her life could be built on another woman's ruin. I told myself then that silence was a shield. Why didn't you tell me? Jordan whispered. I thought I was protecting you both, I said. I thought if I kept this to myself, the only person who would be hurt would be me. I thought I could carry it. His fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper creased. You carried it like a bomb and didn't tell anyone how to disarm it. We sat in that exhausted silence until the sun began to lift a gray finger over the horizon. Then I told him the rest, the things I had never wanted to say aloud, the corners of memory I had walled off to survive. Peter Green had been a presence in the town longer than I'd lived in Maplewood. He had a voice in every Rotary meeting, a checkbook for every school improvement plan, a handshake for every ribbon-cutting photo op. He smiled like a man who believed his hands were clean. But power makes people slippery. It lets them lean on the law and the opinions of others until the truth is drowned out. One night, years before, he cornered me behind the library's heavy oak doors under the guise of thanking me for staying late. Before I could say anything, he had done the thing that turned my world into a private hell. I remember the metallic taste, the way the fluorescent lights spun above me like indifferent stars. When I ran home, shaking and ashamed and small, Madison had already left a card on my counter with her number and a suggestion. Let us help you. The help had come wrapped in cash and lectures. You must be discreet, Madison said, arranging her pearls like punctuation. For Emily's sake. She told me about reputations and campaigns. She told me about what men like Peter did, how they took things and then smoothed the world back into place so no one could see the ripples. She offered money to keep me silent and placed a condition underneath it. Never say a word. I had taken the money because fear is a practical thing. It pays for rent, for hospital bills, for the cost of pretending everything is fine. The money paid for a small apartment near Main Street for a season. It paid for the deposit when I enrolled in night classes to learn bookkeeping, so I could provide for my children without asking for handouts. I told myself it was a transaction, a price I paid to keep my child safe. And the pregnancy? Jordan asked. Voice barely a thread, I swallowed. It came not long after, but the pregnancy wasn't his. The words hovered between us like suspended glass. It was mine and David's. David, my husband, gone long before the rest of it, the name was a soft place in memory that time couldn't tear. I lost the baby at 3 months, I said. I think that's when I finally realized silence wasn't protection. It was a prison. But by then, the money was already on the table. Jordan's jaw worked. So Emily isn't related to Nathan, he said slowly, like he was assembling the pieces aloud. No, I said, she isn't. He exhaled, relief and anger tangled in the same breath. Then why would Madison try to make us believe she was? Why plant the idea that he might be connected to your past? I looked at him. Because if Emily discovered the truth by accident, by finding your letter, by stumbling across a cashier's check, then the fallout could be contained. A small scandal, apologies, the mayor's office doing damage control. But if this wedding went through and then the truth came out later, well, it would be far more humiliating. That's what they feared, humiliation. Madison would rather pay to keep a secret than risk the kind of public embarrassment that could crack their world wide open. Jordan's eyes narrowed. So they arranged to buy your silence because they were afraid of information, but they also put us in the same room with their son? It's complicated, yes, I said. Power is messy. They can be clumsy in logic, but precise in calculation. Maybe they thought the marriage would be a neat ending, fold the story into the family photo, stitch it into the narrative of our town, or perhaps they didn't care. Maybe they didn't understand that time makes all lies brittle. He looked down at the envelope again. You said the letter was a suicide note, he said softly. What did you say in it? My throat closed. For years I had kept the words close like a talisman of failure. But now, with my son and my daughter caught in the storm I'd failed to divert, they felt like a confession that needed an audience. I can't live with what they did, I repeated, hearing my younger voice in the cadence of those words. If you're reading this, know that I tried to protect you. I took money so you wouldn't have to carry my shame. I thought it would save you. Jordan's face crumpled. You thought your silence was a gift. I thought it was a way to keep Emily safe from the ugliness of the world, I said. I built a life around that belief. I made choices on that lie, and now the lie has come home to roost. Outside the kitchen window, the town began to stir. People walked dogs, headed to morning shifts, unaware of how the foundation of one family was cracking into dust. I felt both exposed and oddly free. Liberation, I thought, tastes a little like nausea. We could go to the press, Jordan said after a pause. We could tell everything, put it all out there and let them chew it up. No, I said again, though the thought tempted me. If we go public now, it feels like punishment. It will splinter Emily so completely she may never speak to us again. My fingers drummed on the envelope. We need to be careful. We need to choose not only truth but timing. There is a difference. He sighed. Timing, the luxury of people who have the power to wait. I know, I said, but we have something they don't. Truth and, I looked at Jordan, really looked at him, the boy who had grown into a man overnight, and a right to tell it when it will hurt the fewest people. He met my eyes then, and for the first time since the collapsed wedding, there was a flicker of alliance in his expression. All right, he said, but when we do pull the thread, we pull hard. No half measures, no quiet, no favors for names. I nodded. The plan inside me began to take shape like a slow sunrise. We couldn't undo the past. We could, however, unmask it. We could make sure that when the truth came, it came with proof and clarity and with the smallest collateral damage we could manage. For now, the deal we made was simple and solemn. Wait, gather, prepare. And when the time was right, tell the whole town the story not as a sermon, but as a reckoning. We folded the envelope and placed it back in the drawer, under an old sweater. Outside, the day brightened, and for a moment I let myself believe that light could change the shape of things. Jordan was the one who suggested we record it. We were sitting in the living room the morning after the rehearsal dinner. The storm outside was losing its strength, but inside our house something else was gathering, a sense that we were finally ready to stop surviving and start fighting back. I think we should record her, Jordan said, tapping his fingers against the side of his mug. We need proof, not just memories, not old letters. Actual current proof. Something no one can spin. My mind flashed back to Madison's voice in the moonlight, polished and venomous. If this wedding falls apart, I will bury you. You want to bait her? I asked carefully. She's already baited, he replied. You just have to let her think she's won. I stared at him. That's a dangerous game. He gave a thin smile, so staying quiet. That afternoon, I asked Madison to meet me at the church. I told her I needed a quiet place to speak, just us, woman to woman, and that I had changed my mind about everything. I said all the words she wanted to hear, that I was sorry, that I'd lost control of my son, that I just wanted to keep the peace for Emily's sake. She arrived 20 minutes late, floating down the aisle in another sheath dress and oversized pearls. The church was dim, and we were alone, but Jordan had set up a small camera in the organ loft above us, tucked between the pipes. I didn't dare look up. I'm glad you came to your senses, she said, lowering herself into a pew like royalty taking an audience. I stayed standing. I wanted to clarify one thing. She arched an eyebrow. Which is? If you knew the wedding was already a landmine, I asked, why let it go forward? Why not pull Nathan back before the damage? Madison sighed. Because it's cleaner this way. I blinked. Cleaner? She turned her gaze toward the altar as if contemplating sainthood. If the wedding happens and something goes wrong, people blame Jordan, they blame you. No one looks too closely at Peter or Nathan. No one thinks about the past. They just think, poor bride, crazy brother, disgraced mother. Tragic, yes, but not dangerous. I felt my nails dig into my palm. So Emily becomes collateral damage. Madison didn't even blink. That girl is not my concern. She's beautiful, yes, but common. Her career is uninspired. She'll recover. But Peter, Nathan, they can't afford scandal. Especially not now. Especially not now. The words landed with weight. What's happening now? I asked. She smiled thinly. Peter's being vetted for a federal judgeship, Senate confirmation, background checks. If anything unsavory comes up, well, you understand. I could barely breathe. You threatened my family to protect a job? I ensured your family stayed quiet, she corrected. And I paid well for that silence. I stepped closer. And you never once thought about what it did to me, what it did to her. She tilted her head. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about other women's regrets, Jackie. You made a choice, I made a deal, that's how the world works. I felt the burn start low in my throat, the kind of rage that doesn't scream but simmers, quiet and precise. You're right, I said. That is how the world works until it doesn't. Back at home, Jordan played the footage twice. Once with clenched fists, the second time with a notebook open beside him. Every word was time-stamped, every smirk, every dismissal, every damning admission written down. This is it, he said finally. This is what we use. I shook my head. Not yet, Jordan's eyes narrowed. You're still protecting Emily. I'm protecting what's left of her choice, I said. The wedding's tomorrow. She deserves to walk into it with all the truth in her hands, not because it explodes around her, but because we put it in front of her. She won't believe us, he muttered. She'll think it's jealousy or sabotage. Nathan's been the one thing she's clung to since Dad died. I nodded. Then we don't tell her, Shelley does. He blinked. What? She trusts Shelley more than anyone. She's like a little sister to her. If Shelley plays the video in the church before the vows, Emily won't be able to look away. She'll listen. He stared at me. That's cold. No, I said quietly. That's surgical, and the wound has to be clean. The next morning, Shelley arrived wearing a dress the color of seafoam and the expression of a soldier preparing for battle. She was only 11, but smart enough to understand what we were doing, brave enough to carry it. You sure you want me to say it? She asked me as I pinned her hair. Right there in front of everyone? I met her eyes in the mirror. Do you know why I'm asking you? She nodded. Because Emily won't see it coming from me. No, I said. Because you're the only person in that church who has nothing to gain and nothing to hide. She took the tablet from Jordan and clutched it to her chest. Then I'll do it. You already know what happened next, the aisle, the hush. The way Pastor Coleman's voice echoed off the stained glass. The moment Jordan stood up and then Shelley followed. The silence, the video, the sound of Madison Green's voice filling the sacred air with its poison. That girl is not my concern. I ensured your family stayed quiet. Peter's being vetted for a federal judgeship. The gasps, the tears, the roar, Emily's scream. And through it all, I didn't move. I stood where a mother stands when the storm hits, not in front of it, not behind it, but in the very center. Because that's where truth finally lives, not in secrets, not in sacrifice, but in the light. And for the first time in my life, I let it shine straight through me. By the time we got home from the church, the video had already been seen more than 300,000 times. Jordan's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Shelley sat at the kitchen table holding a juice box with both hands like it was a lifeline, her little face frozen in a mixture of confusion and relief. Emily hadn't come with us. She'd left the church in silence, shoes in one hand, veil in the other, disappearing into the back seat of a friend's car without saying a word. And me? I stood at the sink, staring out the window, dish towel clutched in my fist, listening to the rumble of my own pulse as the world finally turned its face toward our truth. The clip was 2 minutes and 43 seconds long. In it, Shelley stands, steady, small, brave, clutching the tablet with both hands. The video plays, and Madison Green's voice fills the church like poison. Her exact words, "That girl is not my concern. Peter's being vetted for a federal judgeship. You made a choice, I made a deal." The camera pans to Emily's face as she realizes the groom's family had turned her life into a chess move. Then the final shot, Madison's pearl-white face cracking as the room erupts around her. A woman built on power, caught in the wrong light. By the time we reached the driveway, the video was on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok under hashtags like #Greenagate, #MadisonExposed, and #ChurchCrash2025. By dinner, it had hit 1 million views. Jordan dropped his phone on the table like it was hot. We didn't even release it. I nodded. Someone else did. I didn't need to ask who. At least 10 people in that church had been filming the moment Shelley stood. One of them had uploaded it. The rest had followed. You think it was Emily? He asked. I shook my head. She looked too broken. He stared out the window, jaw tight. So what happens now? I didn't know. I wasn't sure I wanted to. That night, the internet did what the internet does best. It multiplied. The video was stitched into reaction clips, slowed down, captioned, analyzed. A lawyer on YouTube uploaded a 15-minute breakdown on whether Madison's statements qualified as coercion or defamation. A therapist posted a thread about maternal manipulation and emotional abuse. Comment sections exploded. Top comment on one viral TikTok. This is the kind of stuff you expect on Netflix, not in real life. Another, Shelley is the bravest 11-year-old I've ever seen. Give that girl a medal and a lawyer. And then came the backlash, not at us, but at the Greens. Within 24 hours, Peter Green's official mayoral website was down for maintenance. Madison's charity board membership was revoked. A change, org petition titled Remove Peter Green from Judgeship Consideration had over 100,000 signatures. The town, once a fortress built on handshakes and golf tournaments, began to crack. On Monday morning, I walked into the grocery store for a carton of milk and found my name printed across a tabloid at the checkout. Small town mother stands against political dynasty. Below it, a photo of me, mid-sentence, frozen forever in a moment I had never planned to become public. A cashier named Marnie, who used to sit beside me at school board meetings, stared at me for a full 10 seconds before saying, "You're a hero, Jackie." I didn't know what to say to that. I was tired, and being a mother had never felt like heroism. It felt like bleeding slowly with a smile. That afternoon, Emily came home. I heard the front door open and close soft steps in the hallway. She didn't call out. She went straight upstairs, and for a moment I thought she might lock herself away again. But 10 minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, face washed clean, eyes hollow. I watched the video, she said. I nodded, heart in my throat. I watched it again and again, 10 times, I think. I wanted to reach for her, but I waited. She sat down slowly, folding her hands on the table. I thought I was marrying into security, a future, a name that meant something. You still can, I said gently. Just maybe not the name you thought. She gave a soft, bitter laugh. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know about the money, the silence, the way they used you like a wall to hang their lies on. I swallowed. I let them. No, she said firmly. They made you, there's a difference. We sat in silence for a while, then quietly, did you ever think of telling me? Every day, I whispered. But you were happy, you were in love, and I thought maybe that was worth more than truth. Emily wiped her cheek. I don't hate you. That was when I finally cried. Later that night, Jordan showed us the analytics. 7 million views and counting. News networks were picking it up. BuzzFeed ran a listicle. 10 times women quietly took down corrupt men and one brave girl who was louder than all of them. We watched Shelley sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a dinosaur blanket, clutching the tablet like a knight with her sword. She didn't understand the full weight of what she'd done, but she understood enough to know she had defended truth. And truth, when spoken with courage, echoes longer than lies whispered in power. At sunrise, I brewed coffee and stood by the window. For years, I'd believed silence was the nobler choice, that by protecting Emily from pain, I'd preserve something good. But the world had shifted. Emily had seen the truth, and she hadn't collapsed. She had stood in the ruins of everything she thought she knew and come home anyway. The cost of truth is never nothing. But sometimes it's the only currency worth spending. On Monday morning, I walked into the grocery store for a carton of milk and found my name printed across a tabloid at the checkout. Small town mother stands against political dynasty. Below it, a photo of me, mid-sentence, frozen forever in a moment I had never planned to become public. A cashier named Marnie, who used to sit beside me at school board meetings, stared at me for a full 10 seconds before saying, "You're a hero, Jackie." I didn't know what to say to that. I was tired, and being a mother had never felt like heroism. It felt like bleeding slowly with a smile. That afternoon, Emily came home. I heard the front door open and close soft steps in the hallway. She didn't call out. She went straight upstairs, and for a moment I thought she might lock herself away again. But 10 minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, face washed clean, eyes hollow. I watched the video, she said. I nodded, heart in my throat. I watched it again and again, 10 times, I think. I wanted to reach for her, but I waited. She sat down slowly, folding her hands on the table. I thought I was marrying into security, a future, a name that meant something. You still can, I said gently. Just maybe not the name you thought. She gave a soft, bitter laugh. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know about the money, the silence, the way they used you like a wall to hang their lies on. I swallowed. I let them. No, she said firmly. They made you, there's a difference. We sat in silence for a while, then quietly, did you ever think of telling me? Every day, I whispered. But you were happy, you were in love, and I thought maybe that was worth more than truth. Emily wiped her cheek. I don't hate you. That was when I finally cried. Later that night, Jordan showed us the analytics. 7 million views and counting. News networks were picking it up. BuzzFeed ran a listicle. 10 times women quietly took down corrupt men and one brave girl who was louder than all of them. We watched Shelley sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a dinosaur blanket, clutching the tablet like a knight with her sword. She didn't understand the full weight of what she'd done, but she understood enough to know she had defended truth. And truth, when spoken with courage, echoes longer than lies whispered in power. At sunrise, I brewed coffee and stood by the window. For years, I'd believed silence was the nobler choice, that by protecting Emily from pain, I'd preserve something good. But the world had shifted. Emily had seen the truth, and she hadn't collapsed. She had stood in the ruins of everything she thought she knew and come home anyway. The cost of truth is never nothing. But sometimes it's the only currency worth spending. Shelley had always been good at pretending things didn't bother her. She could watch the news talk about the mess her family had become, the scandal, the lies, the soundbite analysts, and still sit at the table calmly doing her math homework, pencil tapping lightly, like the world wasn't cracking open beneath her sneakers. But even the strongest kids have a limit, and Shelley hit hers 3 nights after the wedding. It was almost midnight when I heard her scream. The sound tore through the hallway like a blade. I rushed from bed, heart pounding, Jordan right behind me. We burst into her room, finding her tangled in sheets, soaked in sweat, thrashing against something only she could see. No, no, I didn't tell them, I swear. Please don't be mad. She sobbed. I knelt beside her, brushing damp curls from her forehead, whispering her name until her eyes opened and her chest slowed. She blinked up at me with the kind of shame no child should ever have to carry. I dreamed Mom found the video, she whispered. She made me delete it, then she locked me in my closet. Jordan's fists clenched. He turned away, jaw tight. He hated this, watching someone that young carry fear like it was a birthmark. She can't hurt you, I told her gently. Not anymore. But she's still mad at me, Shelley said. Even if she's not here, she's still mad. I know it. The next morning, Frank came over with a paper bag of Shelley's clothes, her favorite stuffed bear, and a hollow look behind his tired eyes. She's not eating much, he admitted. She doesn't want to go to school. She says everyone stares. Everyone is staring, Jordan said, not unkindly. But they're staring because she's brave, not because she's weird. Frank nodded. But I could see it, the weight of single fatherhood settling into his shoulders like a winter coat he hadn't asked to wear. I've been thinking, he said slowly, maybe it's time we formalize some things. I froze. What do you mean? She's been here more than with me, he said. She calls this home. She calls you when she's scared. And look, I'm doing my best, but I travel. My job's not stable right now. I'm not always present the way she needs. You're saying, I think maybe she should live here, permanently, with you. It should have felt like a victory, a reward. I'd spent months, years, even watching Shelley grow into a little version of the woman I wish I'd been, honest, unafraid, full of fierce love. Taking her in should have felt like crossing a finish line. Instead, I felt grief. Grief for the mother Shelley used to have, even if that mother had hurt her. Grief for the little girl who still held on to the hope that one day Agnes might walk through the door and be different. And yes, grief for myself, because once again I was about to carry someone else's consequences. Does Shelley want this? I asked. Frank nodded. She asked me last night if she could stay with you forever. I called a lawyer the next day. Not for drama, not for headlines, for Shelley. Her name was Marisol Clark, recommended by a women's legal network I'd been quietly part of since last year. She was smart, firm, and wore sneakers with her suit. She listened without blinking as I explained everything, the video, the threats, the trauma, the nightmares. We can petition for a custody modification, she said. Given the public nature of the scandal and the emotional risk. It's strong, but Jackie? She looked at me seriously. Agnes still has parental rights. She's still Shelley's legal guardian. We'll need to prove she's unfit. That might get ugly. I exhaled. It's already ugly. When the papers were served to Agnes, she didn't call me. She called Emily. I found out when I walked past Emily's room and heard the low hum of her voice through the door. Not angry, not cold, just flat. I don't know what you want me to say, Mom. She murmured. No, she didn't put me up to it. You made your choices and now Shelley is making hers. Then silence, the click of a call ending. I knocked gently. Emily opened the door, eyes rimmed red. She says I betrayed her, she said. That we all did. She asked me if I think she's a monster. What did you say? I told her monsters don't usually know they're monsters, she said quietly. But she does. A week later, we went to court. The hearing was short, only 35 minutes, but it felt like an autopsy on our entire past. Agnes appeared via video call. She looked thinner, paler. Her lawyer sat stiffly beside her, a woman clearly trying to hold back a tidal wave of damage. Marisol presented the videos, not all of them, just enough to draw a line from cruelty to consequence. She read Shelley's written statement aloud. Jordan held her hand the whole time. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood. I'm not trying to take Shelley away from her mother, I said. I'm trying to give her peace. She's already lost too much. She needs something permanent, something calm, something safe. The judge looked at Agnes, who stared back through the screen like a stranger peering into someone else's tragedy. The ruling came swift. Temporary physical custody to Jacqueline Carter. Legal custody review to be held in 90 days. Contingent on Shelley's well-being and Agnes's compliance with therapy and visitation guidelines. Shelley clutched my waist in the hallway afterward, burying her face into my coat. I don't have to go back? She whispered. No, I said, not unless you want to. That night, we ordered pizza and put on a dinosaur documentary. Emily sat on the floor with a blanket around her shoulders, and Jordan let Shelley braid his hair into 5 uneven pigtails while pretending to be a T-Rex. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life I thought I'd build, but it was honest. It was earned, and sometimes that's the best you can hope for. The house phone rang at 6:42 a.m. The next day, a relic of a time before cell towers and live-streamed heartbreaks. I hadn't heard its sharp, clipped tone in months. I was pouring Shelley's cereal when I picked it up, bracing for a telemarketer or a well-meaning neighbor who wanted to check in. Mrs. Carter? The voice was smooth, clipped, professional. This is Nora Havorson with Channel 7 News. We'd like to formally request an interview, a sit-down. Exclusive on your terms? I hung up. The calls kept coming. CNN, Good Morning America, a podcast that billed itself as where real women tell real stories. Someone sent cupcakes with a business card buried in the frosting like a prize in a cereal box. The entire country, it seemed, wanted to turn our family's trauma into a primetime segment. It wasn't just us. Madison Green's name was trending on Twitter. TikTok had taken to remixing her now iconic line, "That girl is not my concern," with slow-motion edits, sinister piano music, and captions like, "When the villain finally says it out loud." The internet had crowned her the face of elite cruelty. Peter Green's nomination for the federal bench had been officially suspended, pending further investigation. And Emily? Well, Emily had stopped leaving the house. On the third day of silence, she finally sat beside me on the porch, knees tucked to her chest, eyes heavy with the weight of having loved a man who was the face of a lie. "I keep thinking about how many people smiled at me and told me they were proud," she whispered. "And they knew, they all knew. They didn't know you," I said gently. "They knew the part of you that fit their story." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Maybe it's time to tell our story." I turned to her. "You mean publicly?" She nodded. "Let's stop letting other people define what happened. No more memes, no more speculation, just truth from us together." We called Ramona. She was Emily's college roommate, now working in PR for a major nonprofit in DC. The kind of woman who kept her coffee black, her nails short, and her emails sharp. She'd been watching the storm unfold online from afar, and when Emily told her we were ready to speak, she didn't hesitate. "You need to control the narrative," she said. "Not for fame, for safety, for dignity." We rented a modest event space downtown, the old community center with a leaky roof and a charm that couldn't be bought. Ramona arranged for a podium, a handful of press passes, and a camera crew from a local PBS affiliate. "We keep it small," she insisted. "No national media, just people who want the truth, not a soundbite." Jordan offered to handle security. Shelley made a sign with glitter glue, "Truth belongs to the brave." The morning of the press conference, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, smoothing the front of my blouse. The lines around my mouth had deepened. My hands trembled when I applied lipstick. Shelley peeked in. "You look like a lawyer," she said. I smiled. "Good, I'm about to prosecute reality." The room filled slowly, reporters, community leaders, familiar faces from church, strangers I didn't recognize. The mayor wasn't there, nor was Madison. At 11:03 a.m., Emily and I stepped to the podium. The room hushed. Cameras blinked red. Emily began. "3 weeks ago, I was supposed to get married. I walked into that church believing I understood love, truth, and family. I didn't, not because I was naive, but because I was deliberately lied to by people who claimed to love me." She glanced at me and I took over. "I was 29 when Peter Green assaulted me," I said. "And I was 30 when Madison Green paid me to stay silent. I took the money, thinking I was protecting my children. But all I did was trade my voice for their illusion of safety." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped a pen. Emily squeezed my hand. "Shelley Carter, my niece, my daughter in every way that counts, is the reason we're standing here," I continued. "She did what generations of women before her couldn't. She told the truth out loud in public with proof." Then we played the footage, the same clip, Madison's voice, the words that had changed everything. When the video ended, I looked out at the room. "This isn't just about one family or one town," I said. "This is about the systems that protect power at the expense of victims, about what happens when silence is enforced, not chosen." Emily added, "We don't want fame. We want restoration, and we want people like Madison and Peter Green to know this ends here." The Q&A was brief. "What do you want to happen next?" one reporter asked. "I want my daughter to feel safe walking into a room with her head held high," I answered. "I want Shelley to know she was right to speak up, and I want every other woman who's ever been paid to disappear to know she doesn't have to vanish." "What about Peter Green's nomination?" "We'll let the justice system decide," Emily said. "But we've already decided. His version of the truth doesn't get to be the only one anymore." That night, the press conference aired on local TV and was reposted across the internet. But this time, it wasn't a viral moment. It was a declaration, a resetting of the story, on our terms. Shelley sat between Jordan and Emily on the couch, holding a bowl of popcorn like she was watching a superhero movie. "You were so calm," she whispered when I came back from the kitchen. "I wasn't," I said, "but I was ready." She smiled, her eyes sleepy but bright. "Can I speak at the next one?" My throat caught. "You already have, sweetheart, you already have." 3 days later, we got a call from the Senate Judiciary Committee. They'd like to speak with us about Peter Green's past conduct. Not as gossip, not as scandal, as testimony. And this time, we wouldn't be whispering behind closed doors. The letter came in a white envelope, thick and expensive, the kind that tries to scream dignity even when it's soaked in guilt. It was hand-delivered, no postage, no return address, just slid through the mail slot like a secret too ashamed to knock. Jordan found it on the floor and handed it to me like it might explode. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Jacqueline Carter. Scripted, slanted, too careful to be kind. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the kitchen counter next to the bananas and Shelley's dinosaur-shaped post-it notes, daring myself to ignore it. But some wounds itch from the inside out, and by sunset, I was holding it in both hands, back straight, heart steady. Dear Jacqueline, I expect you won't believe me, but I am sorry. Not for being caught, though that has been humiliating beyond words, but for what I did. I convinced myself for years that I was protecting my family, that you were a threat, that silence was cleaner than truth. I see now that what I was protecting was my own fear. My husband no longer speaks to me. My son barely returns my texts. The life I built carefully, socially, publicly has been reduced to whispers behind curtains and committee removals. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I am simply trying to say I see it now. I see you. I see what I did to you. And I see what I cost my own grandchildren in the process. You won, Jacqueline, completely and publicly. I hope that brings you peace. Madison Green. Emily read it after I did, her mouth tight, eyes unreadable. She's not sorry, she said flatly. She's sorry it's over. Sorry she doesn't get to keep pretending she's untouchable. She's trying to. I don't know, acknowledge it maybe, I offered. Emily shook her head. She's trying to put a bow on a bomb. I folded the letter in half, then in half again, and dropped it in the recycling bin under the sink. No bow is going to fix this. 2 days later, Madison called. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. Jackie, I need you to know I was manipulated too, by Peter, by the system. I made mistakes, but so did you. Keeping that letter involving your son, we were both just mothers trying to survive. No, we were not the same. That Sunday, I took Shelley to the park. She ran toward the monkey bars with a kind of reckless joy I hadn't seen since the church, bare knees, wind in her braids, shouting, "Watch me," like she'd never carried the weight of someone else's secrets. Emily met us there. She brought sandwiches and sat beside me on the bench, chewing quietly, watching Shelley leap from bar to bar like she was made of steel and light. She wrote to me too, Emily said after a while. I didn't ask who. She said she hopes one day I'll understand what it's like to be a mother, that I'll see why she did what she did. I raised an eyebrow. And do you? Emily looked down. I understand what it's like to want to protect someone so much you'd lie, but I also know that real protection means telling the truth before the damage gets too deep to pull out. Shelley tumbled off the bars and came running over out of breath. Did you see that? I made it all the way across. Emily smiled. You're unstoppable. Shelley beamed. Can we go get ice cream later? I ruffled her hair. Absolutely. That night, after the dishes were done and Shelley was curled up in bed reading a graphic novel about girl scientists in space, I found myself standing by the recycling bin, staring at the folded white letter inside. It was still there, still whole, still radiating everything I refused to carry anymore. I reached in, took it out, and held it for a long moment. Then I fed it to the fireplace, watched the flames catch the thick paper, curl the ink into ash. Watched Madison's words vanish without ceremony. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about apologies. They don't fix what was never meant to be healed, they just repaint the surface. And some rot goes too deep. The next morning, Jordan showed me an email. Subject line, urgent, Green family lawyer requesting private mediation. I didn't open it, he said, but I figured you'd want to know. I nodded. They're panicking. The Senate hearings are getting closer. You going to meet them? No. You sure? Yes, I said, because if they want closure, they can find it where they buried the truth, deep, cold, and in the dark. Emily got another letter the following week, this one from Peter. She didn't open it. She left it on the stoop and watched the rain ruin it, page by page, until his careful cursive blurred into gray rivers. One night, while folding laundry, Shelley asked me, "Do you think my mom's sorry yet?" I paused, her tiny T-Rex shirt still warm from the dryer in my hands. "I think she's still figuring out what sorry means," I said. "Would you ever forgive her?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know forgiveness isn't something people earn with words, it's something they build with what they do next." Shelley nodded. "I hope she builds something good so I can visit it someday." I kissed the top of her head. "Me too, baby, me too." It was late when I finally sat down at the kitchen table. Lights low, house quiet. I opened a new journal, one with no name on the cover, no lines, just blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page, I wrote, "Apologies that come too late are just confessions without change." Then I turned the page, ready to start writing something new. The morning light filtered through the blinds in thin golden slats, striping the kitchen floor with soft warmth. I sat at the table with a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, listening to the quiet sounds of life. Shelley humming as she brushed her teeth upstairs, Emily flipping pages of a magazine on the couch, and Jordan tapping softly on his laptop in the next room. For the first time in what felt like months, no one was crying, pacing, or whispering around a secret. It was a strange kind of peace, fragile, like the thin layer of ice that forms on a puddle overnight. You don't trust it enough to step on it, but it's beautiful just the same. Emily made her choice 2 weeks later. We were sitting on the back porch, sipping iced tea from mismatched mugs. Spring had finally arrived in Maplewood. The forsythia bushes were blooming wild along the fence line, and the birds had returned with their usual noisy optimism. I got an offer, Emily said. I looked up from my mug. A firm in Boston, public interest law, women's rights and legal aid, low pay, heavy hours, exactly what I want. There was something in her voice, not just determination, but clarity. She had been through the fire, and now she knew exactly what kind of steel she wanted to become. You should take it, I said. She nodded, then added, I want to defer it a year, stay here, help with Shelley, be around for the next custody hearing. I smiled. You're allowed to leave, Em. You've done more than enough. She met my eyes. She's our family now, we don't leave family. It wasn't a grand declaration, just a quiet promise, the kind that holds more weight than any vow spoken at an altar. Later that night, after Shelley fell asleep with her book open on her chest and dinosaur socks kicked halfway off the bed, Emily came into my room. She asked me if I'd still want to be her sister if I didn't have to be, she said, standing in the doorway. What did you say? I said I want to be her sister more now than I ever did before. Because this time it's not because of blood, it's because I choose her. I nodded, my throat too tight to respond. We celebrated the anniversary of the wedding that wasn't with a small dinner at home, nothing fancy, just homemade pasta, garlic bread, and chocolate cake. Shelley insisted on frosting herself. Frank came too. He brought Shelley a new telescope and stayed for dessert, sitting next to Jordan and laughing like someone still learning how to breathe again. He was trying, that counted. After dinner, Shelley stood up and tapped a spoon against her glass like she'd seen adults do at formal toasts. I want to say something, she said, face serious. We all turned to her. I know this year was weird, she began, and sad and sometimes really scary, but I'm glad it happened. Emily raised an eyebrow. Even the church part. Shelley shrugged, especially that part, cause that's when everything started to get better, even if it didn't look better yet. She turned to me, then to Emily, then to Jordan. I don't think I'll ever forget what Mom did, but I don't think I need to be mad forever either. People can be really, really broken. That doesn't mean I have to break too. No one spoke for a long time. She had said it all. That night, Shelley came into my room in her pajamas, holding her pillow under one arm and her stuffed bear under the other. Can I sleep with you tonight? Of course, honey. Bad dream? She nodded, crawling into bed beside me. Not scary bad, just memory bad. I wrapped an arm around her. Want to talk about it? No, she said. I just want to not be alone. So we lay there, side by side in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, the world still spinning outside our window. A week later, Agnes sent a message through Frank. She's clean, she's sober, she's doing the therapy, she wants to see Shelley. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I told him what I'd told Shelley months ago. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give for someone else's comfort. It's a weight you put down when you're ready. We'll see, I said. That was enough, and so our family kept moving. Not away from what had happened, that would have been impossible, but forward through it together. Emily started a legal blog that gained traction faster than we expected. Jordan applied for journalism school. Shelley joined the school newspaper, and her first article, How to Tell the Truth Even When It's Hard, won a statewide youth writing award. As for me, I went back to work part-time. I cooked, I listened. I watched Shelley grow into someone fierce and kind and wildly imaginative. I started sleeping again. I smiled without rehearsing it. The cracks were still there, but we weren't afraid of them anymore. We had learned that broken things don't always need fixing. Sometimes they just need love. To all of you who have walked this road with us, page by page, chapter by chapter, thank you for your time, for your patience, for believing in the quiet strength of an ordinary mother and the extraordinary courage of a little girl who told the truth. Wherever you are, I hope you hold your family close tonight. I hope you choose truth, even when it's hard. And I hope more than anything that you know healing is possible. It may take time, it may not look perfect, but it is always, always worth it. Wishing you peace, health, and happiness in your home and your heart. With love, Jackie Carter.